Untuk mengoptimalkan bonus demografi pada tahun 2045, Indonesia mengerahkan beragam upaya untuk mengentaskan stunting. Angka stunting di Indonesia sudah jauh membaik, di mana tahun 2014 berada di level 37% dan pada tahun 2022 berada di level 21,6%. Namun angka ini masih begitu jauh dari target pemerintah Indonesia yang berada di level 14%. Lalu bagaimana nasib 79 juta anak-anak Indonesia yang berada di bawah umur 18 tahun? Kami berbincang dengan Unicef Representative in CNBC Indonesia, Maniza Zaman, di CNBC Indonesia Prime Words bersama saya, Safrina Nasution. Dan telah bergabung secara eksklusif di CNBC Indonesia Prime Words, Unicef Representative Indonesia, Maniza Zaman. How are you, Maniza?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you so much for joining us in CNBC
Thank
Indonesia.
you.
So UNICEF has been in Indonesia for quite a long time, 75 years. How is actually the role of UNICEF for the children in Indonesia? What is the main focus for the children in Indonesia, especially since your establishment?
Thank you. It's a real privilege to come to Indonesia, a country where UNICEF has been here, as you mentioned, for such a long time. We truly value the trusted partnership that we have with the government of Indonesia to further children's rights in this country. And of course, over that time, so many things have changed. Yes. And so UNICEF with that has also changed in terms of the kinds of issues that we're looking at, right? Currently, we're now at a post-pandemic, hopefully, time, and we really have to take stock of what were the issues for children before the pandemic and what are some of the current issues which have come up post-pandemic. So really, if I have to look at, what are some of the main priorities for us here, first and foremost, I would say really shining a light on the children that have been left behind, looking at this country, which is huge and geographically diverse. You do have a lot of children who are doing really well, benefiting from so much, but you still have children in this country who are facing real challenges. Challenges when it comes to nutrition, stunting, as you know, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Issues related to loss of learning.
Learning loss.
Exactly. The COVID pandemic really hit the education system and many other things, of course. Challenges related to immunization and getting the full course of immunization. Challenges related to issues that we call related to child protection, so child marriage, birth registration, water and sanitation also. So there is a multiple issues that we're looking at. While Indonesia has made a lot of progress over the years, we do need to focus on those children that have been left behind. So I would say that's a real priority.
The multiple issues here, right?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned about stunting, so I would like to read some data. So until 2021, Indonesia is still listed as the 4th-ranked countries in the world and 2nd in Southeast Asia with the highest number of cases of stunting for the children under 5. What are actually usually the obstacles of dealing with stunting, especially for developing countries like Indonesia?
Thanks a lot. I think, let me first start with the good news, which is that Indonesia over the years, over the last 10, 15 years, has made good progress in terms of reducing stunting, for sure. And there is a real high-level political commitment here to see stunting go down and down and down, right? So that's really great to have that level of, I think, emphasis on this particular issue. But yes, we still have a challenge. The latest data that's coming out from the nutrition surveys done last year is showing about 21.6% of children under 5 are stunted. Yeah. That's about 1 in 5 children, right? It is like 4.5 million children in this country are facing this issue. So I think it's important to understand what causes stunting before we look at what are the obstacles, what are the solutions. And there, I think there are several issues. One is related to how children, babies, are actually nourished from the time that they're conceived to especially the first 2 years of life. Yeah?
The first 1,000 days of life.
Absolutely. We call that a window of opportunity. Yeah. Why is that? Because that's when so much of child development is happening and so fast, including the brain. And I think during that time, the brain development is one of the fastest that happens in a life course of a human being. So unless you're able to provide them with the right and proper nutrition during that time, you're going to lose that window of opportunity. So it's the issue of proper infant and young child feeding. It's an important issue. We have the issue related to water and sanitation. We have issues related to health services and so on. So there's multiple factors that contribute to stunting. Let me just give you a couple of data points for Indonesia. The recommendation is that when babies are born, they are breastfed early and for 6 months exclusively. Mm-hmm. In Indonesia, that is less than 50%. Okay? Both early initiation and also exclusive breastfeeding. Then the recommendation is after the 6 months that children are given the right amount, type of nutritious foods that they need for their growth. There too, only 1 in 2 children under 5 are getting what they need. So we have a lot of work to do when it comes to proper infant and young child feeding. Yeah? And I think it's important, as I mentioned to you, water, sanitation, health services. If a child doesn't get proper health services, they get sick. The food that they take in, they cannot digest, etc., etc. So it's a vicious cycle. Yeah. If you have poor water quality, poor sanitation, again, child gets sick, all the nutrients are coming out, they can't absorb as much. So we really need to come together with many different sectors to address the issue of stunting. And sometimes that's not so easy.
Yeah, obviously.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes it's not so easy.
Because but now that you mention about it's actually need a really high political commitment in tackling stunting issues. What do you think is the commitment that is provided by the government of Indonesia from multiple sectors, especially in tackling stunting issues? And further, how do you see the example of success stories from other countries on tackling stunting, ma'am?
Yeah. I want to come back to kind of a point that I made in terms of the political commitment that I see here in Indonesia. We hear the highest level of leadership here talk about stunting. We hear several ministers. We go to the provincial level. We hear it there. So I do think that there is a high level political commitment, and I know that there's ambitions to bring it down to 14% by 2024. And this is being carefully and closely monitored. So political commitment, I think, is definitely there. When it comes to some of the other countries in this region, we have a country like Vietnam that's managed to halve its stunting rate in just about 10 years, which is remarkable. How? Again, the commitment, the multi-sector approach, understanding what is needed in very specific locations. So it's not that we have this formula and it works everywhere in Vietnam. No, let us look at place by place, what is the key issue, and let's target our approach and adjust our approach accordingly. So Vietnam is a good example. If we go to completely another side of the world, Peru is another country that has managed to do that, halving its stunting rate in less than 10 years. Wow. So there are good examples. I do realize, of course, the population in those countries is,
Yes,
of
it's
course, much less.
much
The
less
terrain
than,
is very different
Yeah.
from Indonesia.
Yeah.
I think there are certain things that we can learn, but we will have to have an Indonesian kind of tailored solutions to this issue.
The
Continue to do that.
Indonesian tailored solution, 270 millions of people in Indonesia, another country, another complexity. What should be the most effective way to implement a stunting alleviation program in a country like Indonesia, even though it's a very, very challenging one?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, Indonesia has a great plan and a strategy in terms of the big picture. What are the elements needed to alleviate stunting and to reduce stunting? I think the issue is, given the diversity of this country, you take a place like Papua, you take a place like Aceh on the extremes, one would really have to understand province, district, village level. What are the key determinants of continued stunting in those areas? What is the most important thing that we need to focus on? In some places, it could be water sanitation. Maybe they have the information that they need in terms of the nutrition, education, health literacy. But because they have a real problem with water sanitation, it's not moving the way that it needs to.
Yeah.
Another place, it could be access. The health workers, nutrition counselors are not able to reach the families because the terrain is so difficult. How do you get that information to those communities? So I think a very localized approach based on data, very good evidence, and using that for the right decisions as we move forward is going to be important.
A very localized approach based on evidence and based on data, because we know that every province has dissimilarities, as you
Yes.
mentioned before.
Exactly.
And now we're talking about the risks and the dangers of stunting.
Yeah.
A lot of people already talk about stunting, but not much has been discussed about what actually is the challenge and what actually is the risk that stunting brings to a nation, to an economy. What are the dangers of the stunting problem, and then especially in terms of the economic effect of stunting?
Yeah. I mean, I think, of course, everybody knows Indonesia is on a great economic trajectory. Even with the COVID pandemic, the forecasts are extremely positive, and that one has to congratulate the country. It also has a very young population, and I think that is the promise of having a younger generation in terms of really contributing to the aspirations of the country, including the economy. And where do you develop that human capital? In children, that's where you have to start investing. Yeah. So what happens with stunting, as I was mentioning, that because that really rapid time, that window of opportunity of brain development, for example, if you don't get the right nutrients at that time, you will miss out on the full possibilities of that brain development, okay? So what happens is that with the stunting issue, we actually see that children who are stunted, when they go into education, they have a slightly lesser ability to understand, to learn. We also see later on in life that their earning potential is also reduced. So you are actually having a potential workforce who are not able to be the best that they could be, right?
And fulfilling their potential.
Exactly. And I think there's another issue as well. Studies have shown that stunting is a predeterminant of later on having chronic diseases as well, later on in life. So imagine the health costs in trying to address all that. And so certainly there's a huge economic loss when you have a population or a subset of the population that is suffering from stunting. And in fact, the World Bank data tells us that for every $1 that you invest in a nutrition program, including reducing stunting, you get $48 of return. So it's a very strong return on investment. So it's I think it's an issue, huge issue, one that needs to be urgently resolved. And we really need every single child to really fulfill their best potential.
Yeah, and fulfilling their best potential. And how do we manage the best quality of the window of opportunity, the first 2 years of a child's life?
Exactly.
Right? Well, we will
Absolutely.
continue our conversation after the break. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Dan demikian, dan dialog bersama dengan Unicef Representative in Indonesia, Maniza Zaman, akan kita lanjutkan usai jeda. Tetap bersama kami di CNBC Indonesia.
I think it's important also that we spend time with our children, our young people, to expose them to other forms of entertainment, socialization, be it sports, be it the creative arts, etc., being outdoors.